heard of it, they followed him on foot from the towns. And when they went ashore, he saw the great crowd, and he had compassion on them, and he healed their sick. Now, when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place. The day is now over. Send the crowds away and go into the villages and buy food for themselves." All right, let's stop right there. Has there been any change in what you read up to this point in time? Mm-hmm. Okay, what?
I think on mine it was at the beginning of it was at the beginning. It wasn't evening. For my Luke 6, no, John 6.
John 6. It was evening.
What I read too, it started out different.
Okay, go ahead.
It said the apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all things, and both what they had done and what they had taught. And he said to them, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while."
Okay, so he went for a rest, right?
And yeah, and in the Luke one, it starts out saying close to the same thing where the apostles came back, because it talks about them going out, talking to Herod, doing some stuff, came back, told him what he was done. But the interesting thing is, then he took them and went aside privately, and whereas the Matthew account, it says he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself.
Okay.
Instead of with the disciples, and then there was a difference in who he healed, because in the Matthew one it says he only healed their sick, and then in the Luke one it says he healed anyone who needed to be healed.
Okay.
Without putting that qualification of being sick versus injured, etc.
Okay.
Mark don't even mention it.
Yeah. Okay. So again, we're writing to different audiences, and there's going to be little differences in there. But you mentioned, I mean, is it said?
Yeah, so in John it says, a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on the mountainside and sat down with the disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming towards him, he said to Philip, "Where will we buy food for these people?"
Okay, so stop there, because you're right. Because he was trying to test Philip, okay?
Right.
So, we don't know exactly the time frame in John, okay? The other two say it was evening. We don't know how close of a period of time was that, but it was after he finished teaching. And so his disciples, are going and are saying, "Hey, now here's the key thing. I want you to see in this, and why this is so neat, because I want you to see a pattern that Jesus is trying to teach throughout this, how we need to rely on God instead of relying on ourselves, okay? Because what's happening is they're in a desolate place. They're not near any place. They're not near a town or anything else. They have to go away. Okay. When it gets evening and all these people are sitting around, the disciples aren't mean people. They say, "Hey, look, we need to kind of let them go get their food."
Kind of like living in an iron station or something.
Kind of like living in an iron station, right?
We got one
By the
gas
way,
station, it's all right. That's all we
in
need.
Luke, it adds another thing. It says, "Send them to the surrounding villages and countryside, so they can find food and lodging."
Right. So they can
Right.
find food in
Yeah,
there.
they were really, at least in Luke, they were being compassionate. They're saying, we don't have the room and board for 5,000 of these people out here. It's not just the food; it's the lodging as well.
All right. So we're going to go through this slowly. Okay. So the disciples came to him and said, verse 15 in Matthew, "This is a desolate place. The day is now over. Send the crowds away into the villages to buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They don't need to go away. Give them something to eat." Now let's just stop right there. What does it say in John? About
He said to Philip, "Where should we go? Where should we buy food for these to eat?" Jesus said that.
right. So he tells them first. He says, "You go give them to eat." And I'm sure this caused all kinds of discussions, because I think it was in Luke or in Mark. It said, somebody says, it's going to cost 200 denarius.
It says that in John.
And also John, it's going to cost 200 denarius. You know, whoa, we can't do this. We don't have it. You know, I'm thinking that probably Judas is in this for sure also, because Judas was the one that kept the purse. Okay? But they're all going like, you know, hey, and they're sitting here and they're thinking in their mind, we can't do this. Now here, you got to stop and think. They've been with Jesus. This is not like the very first miracle Jesus ever performed. They've probably been with Jesus now for over a year, if not more. Okay? And so they know what Jesus has done in the past. But still, and they've even been sent out to the cities to disciple others.
And heal people.
And heal people. So they've seen the power that God has. But yet, even with God still standing in front of them, they go, we can't do anything. You know, we can't do anything. And so, you know, John sits there Jesus sits there and he talks to Philip. And he says, Philip, what do you think? Now, what happens next is Andrew in chapter 6 does what in John? What does it say?
Take half a year's wages, what Philip said, and then another of the disciples, Andrew, Peter's brother, spoke up, here is a boy with 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish.
Okay, so let's just stop right there, because in 17 they said, we've only got these 5 loaves and 2 fish. We don't know where those, you know, in Mark and Luke, I think it says basically the same thing. They don't say where it came from.
Yeah, it just says
Well,
nothing more than
it
that.
says
One of the things in Mark that I'm looking at now,
Uh-huh.
when Jesus told them to get something to eat, I don't know if they got the money or not, but they said to him, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat? And
Right.
Question mark, like.
Right. So they're questioning, should we spend all this money? Because it's going to be expensive to do so. So what they're doing is, in the midst of this thing, they're trying to figure out how to feed 5,000 people. And it wasn't just 5,000. And if the Bible's, it was 5,000 men. There was also women and children. So the numbers could have been 10,000. You know? But what they're doing is they're just saying there was 5,000 men there. Okay? So what's happening is Jesus is testing their faith. They're sitting there saying, hey, what's going on? And so he goes to Philip and he says, hey, you know, what do you think we should do? You know, he's testing him. John it says, Jesus already knew what he was going to do. Okay? And if Jesus already knew, guess what? He also knew about this little boy. And I want to pick up a little piece here, because I think sometimes, yes, like Jordan said, when you read some of the gospel, it looks like these guys just stole the fish from this boy. But I like to read it just a tad bit different. Andrew finds this little boy, and this little boy comes up and says, here, I got, 5 fish and 5 bread, here. And so Andrew, and it's neat, because if you read John, Andrew is the one that went out and told his brother, hey, we found the Messiah. So here's Andrew again bringing people to Christ. And he brings this little boy. He says, hey, I've got this. Now, whether they actually stole it from him or actually the kid gave it to him, I think it was kind of neat.
I think Jesus sent him to him based on this scripture, which was said. But he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish.
That's right.
So Jesus sent him to the boy.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
knew what
Well,
was
and Andrew's the one that goes and finds this little boy. Jesus already knew, as it says in John, Jesus already knew what he was doing. He was doing this for a reason. He wanted the disciples to learn that, hey, how do you go about on a day-to-day basis? So the first thing you got to do is you got to recognize your resources. That's what Jesus was teaching. First of all, if you want to see God move, look at what you got. God's going to work through the resources. What do you have? Well, we don't have enough money. Or do you really want us to spend this much money? Here's this kid. He's got 5 loaves, but what is this for 10,000 people? So then watch what happens. So then he says, bring it to me. And then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave it to his disciples, and the disciples gave it to the crowds. All right, so let's just stop right there. Where does your gospel say, or where does that you read how all that transpired?
He told them to sit down in groups of hundreds and fifties.
Okay, so sit down what?
In groups of hundreds and fifties.
Okay, sit down in groups of 150. There was 5,000. So they're going to sit down in groups of 100.
Luke says just 50s.
And Luke just says 50, okay.
Just match it up to Matthew.
Okay.
Right.
So basically, he's having them sit down. He's commanding and saying, okay, you need to follow my commands. So, hey, look at your resources. See what's there that needs to be done. The second thing is that, hey, whatever you have, let's give it to God. So he sits down and he blesses the food. He gives it to God. Jesus teaches him. Next thing he does, he blesses it. Then he begins to say, okay, now have the things out. He wants to teach them something. You're going to see something real clear in a minute. And so he sits down and then he gives the disciples, he starts breaking it. And guess what? They're in groups, real small groups, 5,000. So, okay, if they were just in hundreds, there would be how many groups of hundreds would there be in 5,000? No, 500. If they were in groups of 50, there would be, almost 1,000 groups.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that the disciples had to go give this group food, and guess what? They come back. They already knew there were just 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. But here they're coming
They're
back.
passing out more than they started
They're
with.
passing out way more. And they're just, and you got to stop and think about the disciples. I mean, it's just kind of like, what in the world's going on? But at the same time, as they were giving out the food, and you're going to see this later on, the people that were being fed are also recognizing that this is a miraculous sign that's going on. This is a miraculous miracle that's going on. Because they're being fed, and they don't know they have no clue about the little lad. Go ahead.
It's 50 and 100, not like groups of 50 and 100, not
Okay.
500 and 1,000.
Okay, so they have no clue where this food's come from, but they're sitting there thinking, there's no way they could have brought this much food with them. So here and they keep coming back, and they come back to Jesus, the 12 disciples. Go ahead.
Again, something is bothering me.
Go ahead.
The answer in Luke and in John, in both cases, you give them something to eat, meaning the disciples. And in Matthew it says, they do not need to go away.
Right.
You give them something to eat. And I'm saying to myself, the disciples are a bunch of lug nuts.
Uh-huh.
Right? They got the brains of infantile children. Had he not sent them out before to do miracles?
That's right.
He had already done that. They had gone out and they had done it. He was only asking them to do what he had already empowered them to do.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So,
But being of little faith, how am I going to feed? And by the way, I think it was 15,000 people altogether.